Good morning, everybody, and another morning here in Dublin, walking down towards my other job. So this morning I thought I would talk about the post-Brexit negotiations between the European Union and the UK from an Irish perspective, and what is it that we brought to the table, and what is it that we ended up getting out of it, so to speak. So, as I mentioned in a previous video, the Brexit vote came as quite a shock to most Irish people. Those of us who weren't paying too much attention to the feeling of a large majority of British people, particularly people from England and Wales, regarding their relationship with the European Union, were really taken aback by this. I think most Irish people kind of assumed that the UK as a whole had a tense but fairly productive relationship with the EU. Similar to what Ireland has, whereas except we don't really have a tense relationship with the EU at all. But there are some issues that do cause us a bit of concern, and we thought that Britain had basically the same sort of deal. So when the vote took place, as I said, it came as a bit of a shock to us, and the leading question that was on our minds was, what is going to happen with Northern Ireland? But Northern Ireland wasn't the only issue, really. There were several others which did come to the fore, which we were quite concerned about. Now, I'll get back to Northern Ireland near the end of the video, because that's going to take up like a large portion of the video, and I've already talked in other videos about Northern Ireland and our concerns regarding it. But just to focus on the other concerns that we had, the first and foremost was the so-called land bridge, which was a transportation route running from the continent across England and Wales, and then across the Irish Sea to Dublin. Basically, goods would be loaded onto trucks on the continent, drive to Calais in France, across to Dover in the UK, and then travel across the road networks to Holyhead in Wales, and then across via ferry directly across the Irish Sea to the port of Dublin. With Brexit, this route, while still active, would mean that it would be heavily tariffed, as the UK was now outside the EU's single market and customs union. So we had to kind of rush as quick as possible to try and establish new trade routes. Now, thankfully, a plan was put together really quickly, and a lot of resources were put into shifting the trade routes, so that now a much larger proportion of trade runs through the port of Rosslare in the south of Ireland and the city of Cork than did before, heading towards the ports of Santander in Spain and the port of Le Havre in France, which meant that there wasn't too much disruption of the trade routes between between Ireland and the rest of Europe. Minor, but not major. So that got resolved fairly quickly. The second major issue, which really didn't become an issue at all, was the status of Irish citizens in the UK and UK citizens here. There's about 500,000 Irish people living in the UK and more or less the same UK citizens, or that is single passport UK holders, living here in Ireland. This is thanks mainly to a agreement set up just after our independence called the Common Travel Area, the CTA, which allows Irish citizens complete access to the UK and UK citizens complete access to Ireland, up to and including voting rights, except for, well, of course, EU votes, referendums, and presidential elections. This didn't really become an issue because this agreement predated the European Union by a large margin. So that agreement just continued on unaffected. So thankfully we didn't have much of an issue with regards to that part of the relationship between Ireland and the UK. And that fear didn't really materialise. Then finally there was Northern Ireland. The North, as I've said before in previous videos, was a region, and continues to be a region, where any sort of infrastructure going up on the border would cause an awful lot of tension. This is mainly for historical reasons, but also for the fact that a lot of the border areas are very pro-Republic, very pro-Republican Republic of Ireland. And not exclusively, not all of them, but the vast majority of the people who live along that border would much prefer to be part of a united Ireland rather than remain part of the UK. When we basically made it very clear to the UK that this would have to be seriously considered, because a infrastructure going up on the border, in our opinion, went against the Good Friday Agreement, or the GFA, which was the agreement set up to end the war in Northern Ireland. This resulted in it becoming a high priority for our European counterparts who led the negotiations. Now, you might ask yourself, why did Ireland hand over negotiations to the European Union? Well, there's one very, very important reason why. It is because traditionally in the past, when Ireland negotiated with the UK, we generally came out worse for wear. We're a smaller country, don't have as big a push as the UK does, not as influential, and so therefore it was very difficult. It would be very difficult for us to negotiate our good arrangements between ourselves and our British neighbours. However, being part of the EU meant that we suddenly had a lot of support, and as most European states didn't really know much about the issue of Northern Ireland and its importance to us, they kind of went off our ideas. The European negotiators asked the Irish government what exactly the situation was and how to approach it, and the Irish government gave its opinion, which resulted in the current arrangements that we have, where all of the trade networks are running through the ports and airports in Northern Ireland rather than being on the border. Now, the British tried to avoid this issue, mainly because of the unionist community in Northern Ireland, who were vehemently against it, as it would put up an economic barrier, so to speak, between the UK and Northern Ireland itself. So this resulted in a long series of very ridiculous negotiations, with everything from electronic tracking of devices to using drones to having the border several kilometers away from the actual border itself, having the checkpoints, to even some suggestions, very ridiculous suggestions of tagging Irish citizens and Irish people throughout the whole of the island, so that they could electronically be tracked if they go over or back across the border. There were even suggestions, amongst some, of just invading Ireland and dragging it back into the UK, or forcing Ireland to remain outside to come outside of the EU, just like Britain did. Needless to say, a lot of these suggestions, especially the more aggressive ones, didn't go down too well with Irish people, and definitely didn't go down too well with our EU counterparts either. The end of the day, it took a one-on-one conversation basically between the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Irish Taoiseach, which is what we call a Prime Minister here in Ireland, Leo Varadkar, to come up with the current arrangement, which had been there in the background the whole way through, but it took basically a one-on-one conversation between the two at Chequers to actually make the UK government realise that this was really the only, ever was really going to be the only option. How did Ireland feel about the whole thing? How did most Irish people feel about the whole thing? Well, you say we weren't too pleased. We felt that this was Britain bullying Ireland once again. Whether that is fair or not is another thing. We felt that, okay, if you want to leave the European Union, that's no problem, that's your prerogative, you had your vote, we don't think it's a great idea, but it's up to yourselves. However, if you're going to do this, you really have to make sure that you don't wreck our country as you extract yourself from the EU, because as I've mentioned in other videos, the top priority was for us to not have another conflict here in Ireland, either north or south. Despite the fact that the unionist community were very, and continue to remain, very upset over this, the arrangements actually ended up working out quite well from an Irish perspective. Our relationship with the EU only grew stronger as we realised that we could rely on our EU partners and that they would negotiate in good faith on our behalf, that we weren't going to be thrown under the bus as an EU member, and that we'd actually had a fairly strong say in matters that directly related to us within the European Union, something which traditionally we tended not to have when we were part of the UK. So at the end of the day, the negotiations, although despite the fact that they were very tense, caused quite a lot of damage in Irish-British relations, and still have lasting consequences all the way to today, ended up being something that was that came out reasonably well from the perspective of someone living in the Republic of Ireland. You can travel to the north just the same way as you used to before. There's no major issues, and for those of the mind to see unification between Northern Ireland and the Republic being something that is to work for, which a a lot of Irish people would be. It brought Northern Ireland closer and closer to the rest of Ireland economically, which from the perspective of people of that mindset is only a positive thing. On the other side of the coin, it did cause a lot of tensions between ourselves and the UK, caused a lot of tensions between the nationalist and unionist populations in Northern Ireland, and basically was a very upsetting period. But thankfully the issue did kind of get resolved after quite intense negotiations on both sides. So that is it up to the point of the negotiations. My last video of this series, I'm going to talk about what the situation is in Northern Ireland today, how that agreement has affected both Ireland and Northern Ireland, and what the current trajectory of the UK, how we feel about that with regards to Brexit. Okay, have a very nice day, and I will talk to you again soon. Be good.